Have you ever felt that sinking sensation? The moment when someone who always needed help suddenly doesn't respond when help is needed back, or when the friend who demanded constant availability vanishes the second boundaries are mentioned. That moment when it becomes painfully clear, being too available didn't create loyalty, it created entitlement. And somewhere in that realization, something hardens. A question forms that changes everything. What have I been doing to myself?
In my years, I have learned that truth is not a destination, but a path I...
Carl Jung understood this moment intimately. He called it the beginning of awakening, when the psyche finally recognizes that it's been betraying itself in the name of connection. That availability wasn't love. It was fear dressed up as virtue. This is the path back to power, and it starts with understanding what was really lost.
The unspoken contract. Jung discovered that most human behavior operates from unconscious contracts, agreements made in the shadows of the psyche without conscious awareness.
And the perpetually available person has made one of the most destructive contracts possible. The unspoken deal goes like this. If I make myself endlessly accessible, if I sacrifice my time and energy freely, if I prove my worth through constant service, then I will be loved. Then I will matter. Then I will be safe. But here's what Jung would point out with surgical precision. This contract is already broken because the other party never agreed to it. They didn't ask for this self-sacrifice. They simply accepted what was freely offered. And in accepting without reciprocating, they revealed the truth. This bargain only binds one person.
That smells amazing.
I'll have one too, please.
The advice is painful but necessary. Stop honoring contracts that were never agreed to. Stop sacrificing for outcomes that will never materialize. Stop being available as a strategy to earn what can only be freely given.
As these projections show, we are seeing strong upward momentum.
The moment this unconscious bargain is recognized is the moment real choice becomes possible.
The persona trap.
Jung spent years studying what he called the persona, the social mask worn to meet others' expectations and gain acceptance. And constant availability is often a persona, not a genuine expression of the self.
Begin. Please, everyone, help yourselves.
It's the mask of the helper, the good friend, the reliable one, the person who never says no, never sets limits, never disappoints. And this mask feels noble, feels right, feels like who someone should be. But underneath it, often emptiness, resentment, exhaustion, the slow-burning rage of the self that's been abandoned in service of an image. Here's what needs to be understood. The persona of constant availability doesn't attract genuine relationships. It attracts people who need functions, not people who want connection. They're drawn to what can be extracted, not to who someone actually is beneath the performance.
The client just escalated their complaint. We need
The advice is radical. Let the persona crack. Stop maintaining the mask of endless availability. Risk showing the person underneath, the one with limits, needs, and boundaries. The one who sometimes says no. The one who isn't always there. Yes, some people will leave, but they were never connected to the real person anyway. They were connected to the function. And losing functional relationships isn't loss, it's liberation. But Jung understood something that cuts even deeper than lost relationships or broken personas. He recognized that constant availability creates a specific type of psychological damage that most people never connect to their behavior. It fragments the self. It splits consciousness. It creates what Jung called a dissociation between who someone is and who they pretend to be. And this split has consequences that show up in unexpected ways: anxiety, depression, the haunting sense that something essential has been lost but can't quite be named.
The power being sought isn't just social power, it's psychological integration, wholeness, the feminine surrender.
Jung spoke about the Anima and Animus, the feminine and masculine, principles that exist within every person regardless of gender. And constant availability often represents an unhealthy imbalance, an over-identification with the receptive feminine principle at the expense of the assertive masculine. The receptive principle says, I am here for you, I accommodate, I nurture, I adapt to your needs. This is valuable and necessary. But when it exists without the balancing masculine principle, the one that says, I have boundaries, I assert my needs, I protect my territory, it becomes pathological. The person becomes all give and no take, all accommodation and no assertion, all openness and no protection. And this creates a psychological vulnerability that others unconsciously exploit. The advice Jung would offer: reclaim the masculine principle, not as aggression, but as healthy assertion, as the ability to say, this is my time, this is my space, this is where I end and you begin. This isn't about gender. This is about psychological balance, about the integration of opposites that Jung believed was essential for wholeness.
The shadow rebellion.
And here's where it gets dangerous. When constant availability continues too long, when boundaries are never set, when the self is perpetually sacrificed, the shadow rebels. The shadow is Jung's term for the repressed parts of the psyche, all the qualities and impulses that have been deemed unacceptable and pushed into darkness. And for the perpetually available person, the shadow is filled with rage, selfishness, cruelty, all the things that oppose the persona of endless giving. Eventually, the shadow erupts. The person who never says no suddenly explodes. The helper becomes hostile. The reliable one vanishes without explanation, and often this eruption is disproportionate, destructive, and filled with guilt afterward. This is what happens when natural boundaries are never honored consciously. They assert themselves unconsciously, violently, without control. The advice is preventative. Set boundaries now, consciously, deliberately. Don't wait for the shadow to do it through explosive rebellion. Choose unavailability as a conscious practice rather than having it forced through unconscious breakdown.
Because the shadow will have its say. The only question is whether it happens through choice or through crisis, the withdrawal for wholeness.
Jung's entire psychological framework pointed toward one goal: individuation, the process of becoming a complete, integrated individual rather than a collection of roles, reactions, and personas designed to please others. And individuation requires withdrawal, not permanent isolation, but strategic removal from the constant demands of the collective. Time and space to ask, who am I when I'm not responding to someone else's need? What do I want when I'm not accommodating what others want from me?
I know I made mistakes. Please, let's fix this.
You always
These questions cannot be answered while being perpetually available. They require solitude. Silence. The deliberate choice to be unavailable to others in order to become available to the self.
The advice is clear. Create regular, non-negotiable periods of unavailability, not as punishment to others, but as medicine for the psyche. Time where the only person being served is the one who's been neglected most, the self. This is where real power emerges, not the power over others, but the power of self-possession, of knowing who one is independent of others' needs, demands, or expectations. The authentic connection. And here's the paradox Jung observed. When someone stops being too available, when they establish boundaries and protect their inner world, when they risk disappointing others to honor themselves, better relationships emerge. Not more relationships, better ones. Connections with people who respect boundaries rather than exploit their absence. People who value presence rather than constant availability. People who can handle being told no without turning hostile or distant. These are the relationships worth having. The ones built on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. The ones that feel like connection rather than extraction. Jung would say, availability that comes from wholeness is a gift. Availability that comes from fear is a wound pretending to be generosity, and people can sense the difference, even if they can't articulate it. Stop being too available, not as manipulation, not as a tactic to gain social power, but as a necessary act of psychological self-preservation. The self that's constantly given away eventually disappears, and what's left is a hollow persona, performing availability while dying inside. Jung's path to power is the path to wholeness, and wholeness requires protecting the territory of the self with the same fierce commitment others demand from that territory. Set boundaries, honor withdrawal, integrate the shadow, balance the opposites, risk disappointing others to avoid betraying the self. That's where power lives, not in how many people have access, but in how complete someone becomes when access is denied.
Subscribe to explore the psychology of becoming whole.